a lot of people will question how amillennialists understand the binding of Satan. What does that mean? To what extent is he bound?
That's a great question. And I get that question more often than any other single question if I'm out in public and people are, hey, what about this? How can you say this?
Yeah.
Well, the first thing is, John gives us an answer in the passage. Satan can no longer deceive the nations. So if you go back to how Jesus felt about Satan, he's the father of lies, it's his given nature, then Satan's work is to preach a false gospel, to coerce God's people out of relation with Christ, to cause apostasy and schism wherever he can. So the gospel binds him. He can't deceive the nation. So you look at the course of history, the largest world empire, Genghis Khan, how long did that last? Hitler's 1,000-year Reich, 27 years or some such thing? The gospel binds Satan so he cannot control the nations as he did in the four great empires in the book of Daniel. So you had the Babylonians, the Greeks, the Persians, and the Romans. We don't see that sort of thing today because Satan's bound. How do you bind him? You preach Christ. And then there's the providence of God as well, in God's purposes. Again, an apocryphal quote from Luther, I think R.C. Sproul attributes to Luther, and I think R.C. says it more than anybody else, the devil's God's devil. His binding is such that he's limited in his purposes. An old illustration from William Hendrickson, who wrote the first book Baker Books ever published, More Than Conquerors, a book on Revelation, makes a great illustration. If you have a sick and wounded animal on a chain, the worst thing you can do is get within the radius of that animal's chain. Best thing to do is stay out of that animal's radius, and you're safe. And an animal that knows it's going to die and is sick and is wounded and probably hungry is going to be a pretty dangerous foe. So if you're placing yourself in those areas where Satan can influence, he's the god of this age, like a roaring lion looking for those whom he devour. Yeah, he's a fierce foe, but he's bound by the gospel. That's his kryptonite. You preach Christ and you trust the power of the gospel, the spread of the gospel, the providential purposes of God. And that's what keeps Satan bound until the time of the end when he's released. Now, I think it's fascinating that in 2 Thessalonians 2, where Paul discusses the Antichrist, Paul says something is currently restraining him. Might it be the gospel? And that when he's released, the Antichrist, the man of sin, comes on the scene unto destruction. So it seems to me that John and Paul are talking about the same thing. That right before the time of the end, Satan is unbound. His wrath is poured out until Christ returns and destroys him and casts him into the lake of fire forever and ever and ever and ever and ever. So I think that the binding of Satan can be explained by the preaching of the gospel, missionary endeavors, God's providence. The release is explained as the last great cataclysm before the Lord comes and destroys him. So I go up against my brethren in that the man of sin is probably not a current pope, but I don't doubt that at times the papacy has been part of that, as evidenced by the thousands of reformed folk put to death by the French and the Italians and the Spanish during the days of the nation, post-Reformation Holland. So there.